I'm Katina Perrin, and welcome to the book club. While I invite Jodi, Megan, Jasmine, Julie, and Ryan, why don't you go ahead and type in the comments where you're from, maybe put a link to your publication, and I'll go ahead and invite everyone. Just getting everyone invited here. Okay, and one more, and then we'll be all set. Hi, Megan, Jodi. Good to see you.
Hi.
I'm just inviting the editors from the Classic. I'm not seeing them pop up here. Let's see. Huh. Maybe if they're watching this, they can join, they see this. I'm not sure if they're following SPLC. There we go. Okay, they're all invited. Thanks everyone for waiting there. While everyone joins, let me go ahead and, hi Classic.
Hello.
Let me go ahead and introduce myself and then do a little housekeeping, and then we'll toss it off to everyone to talk a little bit about what they're doing here today. So I'm Katina Perrin. I run the Dear Teen Journalist Instagram account, and I'm the author of A Newshound's Guide to Student Journalism. And my favorite thing to do is talk about teen journalism, which is why I'm so excited to be here today with Pulitzer Prize-winning authors Jodi Kantor, Megan Twohey, to talk about their book, Chasing the Truth, a young journalist's guide to investigative journalism. And we've also got, we have 3 editors here from the Townsend Harris High School in New York City, the Classic. They're going to tell us what it's all about, what it's like to be a student journalist in high school doing this type of investigative work. So thanks everyone for joining. It's great to see you all. I'll let you introduce yourselves in a second, but first there's some housekeeping I want to go through for today. So tonight I'm representing the Student Press Law Center. It's a nonprofit organization dedicated to defending and protecting student journalists' First Amendment rights and advisors nationwide. Visit splc.org for reporting guides, answers to your media law questions, and to contact their free legal hotline. Whether you're being censored or just have a question about FOIA or copyright, SPLC is the way to go. Give them a call. They're a huge help. Tonight's Instagram Live is part of SPLC Student Press Freedom Day programming. We're exactly 1 week away from February 24th, which is National Student Press Freedom Day. You can follow us here on Instagram or on Twitter at splc.org or at SPLC. We'll give you updates on events that are happening, workshop, op-ed trainings, and ways that you can take action for student press freedom. So done with the housekeeping, on to the best stuff. Why don't we do some introductions? Megan, do you mind starting?
Sure. Yeah. Well, listen, thank you so much for having us. We're so excited. I can't wait to ask Ryan and Julia questions about their awesome investigative work at the Classic. And so, just a brief introduction. I'm Megan Twohey. I'm an investigative reporter at the New York Times. I've worked a variety of places, from the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel to the language newspaper, Moscow Times, and I've had the pleasure of, while doing the Harvey investigation with Jodi Kantor, and writing this book about her investigation, she said, and now having this young position chasing the truth, that really not only aims to go behind the scenes, bring readers behind the scenes of how we did the Weinstein investigation, but also pauses to give tips, some like very practical advice to young journalists and just basically people who want to make a difference in the world, and explain how we do this work and how they can do it too.
Great, thank you.
So I'm Jodi Kantor. I'm Megan's partner, co-author of Chasing the Truth. I'm extremely excited to be here with the editors from the Classic because I'm a Queens girl myself. I was born in Rego Park. And, you know, Megan and I felt so many things after the Harvey Weinstein investigation. We felt the full force of Me Too. We felt the power of this story having gone global in a way that we never would have expected. But one of the other things we felt was this incredible interest from young people in journalism. And we quickly figured out that student journalism we're in our mid-40s, and student journalism has really changed since we were young. It's become so much more sophisticated. And not only that, but the kinds of stories you guys are taking on are so weighty. Student papers are not about reporting high school basketball scores anymore. I mean, God bless those sort of easy, light parts of the paper. But you guys are reporting on educational crises. You're reporting on COVID. In some cases, you're in communities where traditional reporting has faded. And so you become, at 16 or 17 years old, the reporters in your community. And you have to deal with this really complicated material. And so we wanted to try to create a book that supported you, that makes you feel like you do have, some company among professional journalists like us. And we also want to make sure that you feel really invited into journalism as a field. You know, journalism is hard to find an entry point into. When I was growing up in Queens and Staten Island, I didn't know any authors or journalists. I didn't know how to get into the field. And so we hope that this book feels like, first of all, a little invitation into our partnership for the duration of the Weinstein investigation, for the kind of behind the scenes stuff. But we hope it also makes you feel really welcome in the field, because student journalism can be frustrating. You have to deal with you have to deal with reporting on your own administration. You're not being paid. You're doing adult work at a very young age. And I personally think that the kind of journalism we do at the New York Times is in some ways easier than what students have to do, because we have so much more support. And so we just want to make sure that you feel very invited and welcomed into the field for the long term, even if you have to deal with some short-term frustrations and burnout in what you're doing day to day.
Thanks so much. Classic editors, want to take it from here?
Yeah, sure. Hi, my name is Julia Maciac, and I'm a senior at Townsend Harris and one of the co-editors-in-chief along with these two. It's a great honor to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation and just the honor to speak with you guys. And thank you for your kind words as well. Definitely agree with you on the whole part about journalism. But it's honestly been such an opportunity, such a blessed experience to work with these two. And yeah, just get those few steps into journalism.
Hi, I'm Jasmine. I'm also a senior, and I'm also one of the co-editors-in-chief of the Classic. Like Julia said, journalism is such a collaborative process, which I feel like you really showed in your book. And it was such a great read. By the way, we have it right here on display. We really appreciate the opportunity to be able to be here with you today and have this conversation on investigative journalism, which we feel is really important. And we really appreciate your time. And thank you for Katina and the CLC for setting everything up.
Yeah, hi, I'm Ryan Ng. I'd just like to emphasize everything that Julie and Jasmine said. We really appreciate the time you took to write this book, to really just make journalism more engaging and even something that we can relate to more. It's something that feels more grounded, more real to us, and I really do appreciate that, because in the last couple of years, I think we can all attest to the fact that journalism has been pretty central to our lives and our school community. And just seeing its impact on our school as a microcosm, and its impact in, bringing closure to some, bringing transparency to others, and, bringing the truth to matters that people deserve to know. Like, we've been really impressed by its ability to really, get behind things and, I guess, move communities.
Thank you. So for those who don't know, Chasing the Truth is a brilliant retelling of how Jodi and Megan broke the Harvey Weinstein story for the New York Times. In the book, they outline their journalistic process, and it becomes a guide for student journalists interested in investigative journalism. First of all, Jodi and Megan, thank you so much for paying attention to student journalists this way. I know it means a lot for them to see that their work is not, they're not just students, that they're also journalists. And the fact that you're honoring their work, whether it's college journalist or high school journalist, in this way means a lot. So thank you for doing that. How did the book come about? Why did you think, hey, what we outlined here in our book, she said, would actually be a great kind of training ground for young people?
Well, since we first broke the Weinstein story, Jodi and I have had the pleasure of traveling around the country and even into other countries and going into high school classrooms, going onto college campuses. And as Jodi pointed out, we pretty quickly in these travels picked up on the fact that something like really exciting is happening, I think, just among young people in general, which is that there's clearly a hunger to engage in the world. There's clearly a desire to make an impact, to get to the truth of what's going on, to hold the powerful to account. And when we saw so many of our values reflected back in these young audiences and observed what they were doing in their communities and their schools, we just felt compelled to do this Young Readers Edition directed specifically for them. And we wanted to, as you pointed out, there's in this book, we're taking people behind the scenes into our secret meetings with sources, into our confrontations with Harvey Weinstein when he comes barging into the New York Times. Into some of these like really critical
You're cutting out a little bit, Megan. I don't know, Jodi, if you can pick up. I don't know if maybe it's just cutting out for me, but I don't know if you can pick up on some of that.
Sure, I'll take a turn, and hopefully Megan will be back in a sec. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Yeah, no, I think Megan said it all. It's really about trying to bring all of you on the journey with us.
That's great. So classic editors, this is your conversation. I think we all want to hear more about the work that you're doing. I know you're mid-investigation, so some of that information we won't get all the details on, but if you want to talk a little bit about that, I know you have questions, so I'll let you all take it from here.
And we also wanted to,
I think that's just leftover audio. I don't think that's current audio.
that we were.
Megan, you might have to kind of log out and then log back in. Is that doable, or do I have to reinvite you?
That it could also serve as a manual.
Maybe I'll kick her out and then invite her back in. Why don't we try that? And I'll let no. It might be better. Okay, so classic, you got it from here.
Okay, so we just wanted to ask, with like the story, like first of all, like reading through it, it was pretty thrilling just seeing like all the stuff that you all went through in the process of trying to, uncover it, especially given the circumstances. But, we found that
with practical tips and strategies to apply this to these.
Okay, hopefully that's the end of it. Okay.
Okay. All right, so yeah, so just really the part that resonated with us a lot, especially with our reporting, last year was, towards the end of the investigation, I know that was for all of you. It really became something that was really grueling, especially with, workloads and hours on end of reporting. So we were just wondering that in pursuing the story, how were you able to balance it with your other reporting? So I remember towards the end, you also mentioned that there was a Weinstein charity story that sidetracked you a little bit. So how do you know when to kind of pursue other stories and to stay on the stories that you have been prioritizing?
So that is sometimes really difficult to know, because the nature of investigative journalism is that you're trying to ask really hard questions that you don't know the answers to at the outset of reporting. We were really focused on the investigation about Harvey Weinstein and women, and Megan and I were both fully concentrated on that. It's not like we were doing 5 other stories at the same time, but at the end, Megan it caught Megan's attention that Weinstein had some dealings with an AIDS charity that seemed extremely suspect. The way that sort of money had traveled back and forth from the charity to his business was raising a lot of questions. And one of the things I can tell you about my partner is that when she sees a problem, it's really, really, really hard for her not to dig into it. And so it was a kind of calculated risk to spend some time looking at these charitable issues. And look, there were always trade-offs, there are upsides and downsides, but I think that one thing that was beneficial about it is that it gave her some contact with Weinstein, which we hadn't had, and it became a little bit of a roadmap to how he operated, because not only were there these big questions about whether he had acted properly with this money, but he was like summoning this fancy cast of characters to defend him. You guys are too old to remember and too young to remember MTV VJs, but like he showed up at this big meeting at the Times with Megan, like toting one of the MTV personalities of our youth with him. And we were just like, it was like the equivalent of like somebody showing up for you guys for like in your 40s when you're in the professional world. If somebody showed up at a meeting with like a YouTube star that you had grown up with or something, you would just be like, what is this person even doing in the meeting? And also he kind of attempted to like speechify his way out of it, and he gave these monologues, and people had described to us Weinstein's sort of technique of like sort of being very menacing in one moment and then being almost like a suck up in the next. And it allowed us to sort of see that in action. But ultimately, that did not prove a barrier to us, completing the investigation about his treatment of women.
Okay, thank you.
That's when you talk about it as a roadblock or a road map to how to cover, because I think especially the editors your school has had a lot of experience covering your administration and the DOE kind of administration overall. And I'm sure that feeds into how you do the coverage that you're doing now.
Yeah, definitely. And also just as a follow-up question, I know that Ryan mentioned the charity story. What other reportings were you working on while you were focusing, primarily on the investigation on Weinstein?
Megan, can you hear? Megan, I just want to make sure Megan has a chance to answer. I don't think you can hear me. Okay, I'll take that one, and then hopefully Megan will be back in a sec. I wasn't focused on anything else. In the initial phase, when the editors came to us after the O'Reilly story and said, are there other American men, who are prominent in public life, who have, covered up allegations towards women? That was the period when it was like, oh, who should we focus on? What should we do? And Rebecca Corbett, our editor, was very clear at the beginning that she didn't want, Megan was on maternity leave at this point. she didn't want me to just look at individual men. She wanted me to focus on the forces of complicity and enablement. So it was always bigger than Weinstein, but like really pretty quickly I settled on Weinstein as a subject. And that was quite intimidating because the span of it was so huge. He had run these two big movie companies. He had made hundreds and hundreds of movies, had dealt with 1 million actresses. He had had many employees over the years. And even geographically, like this was a story that it took place in London, it took place in Asia, it took place in New York, it took place in LA, it took place in Washington, it took place in Utah at the Sundance Film Festival, in Ireland. And so even with two of us working on it full time, it felt like it wasn't quite enough. Megan, your reception looks better now. Oh, I can hear you. I can hear you. Okay, why don't Townsend Harris editors, why don't you ask one more question and we'll see if Megan can if we can hear Megan.
Yeah, sure. So we've dealt with a lot of people claiming that we can't really report on something because there are privacy rules. And in the book, we went into immense stuff, like when we're talking to, we're trying to find sources, that people can't speak about allegations because of non-disclosure agreements and other privacy issues. Usually people were very vague about what that really means. So it seemed like that was a big issue while you were investigating. So how do you report on something like this when people are saying it violates other rules or agreements?
Megan, do you want to give it a try? You know what? We still can't hear Megan. Katina, do you want to restart Megan's invitation one more time?
I don't actually know how to kick her out and get her back in. I know she has to kick herself out.
Megan, do you want to hang up and try to come back in?
Fine. Or maybe try killing your camera and just going audio.
Yeah,
that might
that's a good idea.
Oh, I think the Townsend Harris students are at their school and the
Yeah,
microphone timer.
Yeah, it's a motion detector, so
Yeah.
it just went off on us.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll try it this way. So Megan,
Okay,
try
Megan.
saying something. We'll see if we can hear you.
Oh.
So close.
Oh, that was a little better.
Yeah,
We heard you for a second there, but.
Okay, I'll take this one. So your question was about how do you report on something that people can't talk about? It's such a great question. And I'm trying to think what the student journalism analogy is. I mean, I think, for example, one thing that a lot of student journalists have told us is, say a beloved teacher is fired at your school and it creates a big mystery and everybody wants to know what happened. And that's a totally fair question for student journalists to be asking. But then if you go to the administration and people in charge, they'll often say, I can't tell you what happened, for legal reasons. This is, a personnel issue, et cetera, et cetera. So what you need to do is find and it's hard within a school community, by the way, because you're part of a community and, and there might be real reasons that person wants their privacy. But I think the thing you do is you try. Like, for example, you go to that fired teacher just the way you might go to a woman who's a victim of sexual assault, and in our case, and you say, I understand that there are some official rules here, but there also might be some particular reasons to talk. And can we have a confidential conversation? Can you try to explain to me what happened? Do we have to start off the record? Because in the case of that fired teacher, I think what you will often find is that the human need to explain oneself is just so powerful. And like if you go to a beloved teacher in your school who was fired and you ask them, like, how could you not be here anymore? I know you love teaching. I know you were really committed to the students. It seems likely to me that that person is going to feel an enormous desire to tell you. And also sometimes they can find very creative ways of telling you that sort of get around the rules. So what I would say is be very creative, try, and always try to go to the people who were most intimately involved themselves.
I think Megan can
Yeah.
hear us now. Do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I found that reporting so fascinating, and maybe I missed this in my technical challenges. You guys have been so patient and kind with your patience, but one of the things, like, what was so interesting was for me in reading your guys' work was to try to like understand what happened. Like, it was interesting in that there had clearly been a determination by investigators that this teacher was guilty of sexual misconduct, and then there had been this student hearing officer, this hearing officer who had dismissed all of those. It's very interesting when there's like an official process involved here, and that can often give you hooks that aren't otherwise available if it's just an allegation. And in this case, it was very interesting in that it seemed to have been substantiated by officials, school officials, and then had then been dismissed. And I was just curious to know if you had ever been able to interview the hearing official who had basically seemed to overturn the findings.
That was a pretty,
and how you went about
process,
that, how you went about trying
because in the
to
report,
not
I
just
guess
have,
you guys can
not just
touch
talk
upon
to the
this
teacher,
later
but
a little
talk
more,
to
but
the people
there
who
was,
had been
we identified
involved
a lot of
in the
things
administrative
report with,
proceedings
like,
of
the
it.
and everything, and trying to kind of connect the pieces with it, because the sources had remained anonymous, and we have actually also received sources that our past editors from 2 years ago and from last year and others had collected, and we're really just working to try to learn more about it and try to figure out kind of what happened. So in doing so, we reached out to politicians, and I think you guys can add on to that.
Yeah, definitely. We didn't necessarily reach out to the hearing official. We obtained a document from the Special Commissioner of Investigation here in New York City. We received an email anonymously, which outlined sexual misconduct allegations against a former teacher that had been reinstated in our school in the fall. So that really what set into motion our investigative research. We had been compiling research. Our predecessors had collected testimonies as well. And once we got that report, that was really a game changer in the way we could follow with our reporting. It's kind of similar to the O'Connor memo in your own book, in your own process. And so while we didn't directly reach to the hearing officer disciplinary hearings, we did reach out to a lot of different sources, and we talked about a lot about as many perspectives as we could, and we can.
Yeah, I mean, just to follow up with Jasmine, I think a question that we had was, like Jasmine mentioned the O'Connor memo, that was kind of like the key moment that got you, that kind of pushed you and opened that tunnel for you. And we connected a lot to that, because that investigative report was like our own O'Connor memo, but for our situation. So it changed a lot for us in terms of the path that we went on to publish the article. So if you could, we just had a question, like, what is it about those documents that can be so essential to investigative reporting, sort of the like clarity moment documents?
I think that people respond so powerfully to written proof. Like when we wrote Chasing the Truth, you can see in the book that we tried to show you as many documents as possible, whether it's the letter from the so-called feminist attorney Lisa Bloom, in which she's actually sort of saying to Harvey Weinstein, I'm going to use my reputation as a women's rights advocate to, help you defeat Rose McGowan. Like there is an incredible power to those documents. They have an authenticity. They have an evidence. Were often like created at the time of the event. They're often very official, like the Lauren O'Connor memo, was kind of an HR document from within the Weinstein Company, because sometimes people think they're going to be secret. They're much more frank in these documents than, they would be in a sort of public pronouncement. And they give you like an unfiltered look at what was really going on. And, often they spare sources. Sometimes, this is true in the case of some of my recent Amazon reporting, people inside the company gave us documents that really spoke volumes, and it prevented them from having to be interviewed. They were able to sort of secretly slip this stuff and to us and say, look, I just want this company to be better. I don't want to get, in trouble, but I'm going to give you the evidence you need to publish your story.
And when you're setting out to do an investigation or probe something that seems like it's off or could potentially be a story, one of the first things you're doing is to assess what documents may be available, right? So, and you're trying to, not all documents are the same, right? There are the public documents that you can potentially obtain through freedom of information requests and other records requests. Those tend to be the ones that would be like, there should be school records. There should be like, the State Department of Education. You should be able to, as you did, submit record requests to get public documents, right? About the public officials who work in your schools and about the public process of handling bad things that happen in your schools. In the case of Harvey Weinstein, that was one of the first things that we did was to set out and see, for somebody who's been this rumored predator, have there been police reports filed against him? So we were going to police departments in all of the cities where he's resided to ask if there had been police reports. We were going to, there was clearly a pattern of sexual harassment. There are state government agencies that their whole job is to field complaints about sexual harassment. So, we were turning to the California, basically the equivalent of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission there, saying, have there been complaints filed against him or his companies? And in that case, we found one complaint that had been filed and then had basically like disappeared. It was not clear how it had been resolved. And so, I was on the phone trying to track down the investigator who had worked on that case so many years before. And, unfortunately, we weren't able to obtain the details of that. And it became for us a clue, right? That how was it that this person who had been, where there were so many, we were starting to gather these allegations of like, that suggested a pattern of sexual abuse and sexual harassment. Why weren't there any public records against him? Why wasn't it showing up in the criminal justice system? Why wasn't it showing up in the civil, government agencies that are supposed to be handling this stuff? And that's where we started to then get, realize that so many cases of sexual harassment and sexual misconduct, so many of the allegations had actually been handled in this sort of secret out of court settlements, which, are basically the de facto way of dealing with sexual harassment in this country. And what's so problematic about them is these aren't public records. These are very secretive, confidential records in which sources are actually, can actually face real financial consequences if they give you those records. And so, so when you're setting out to report, you want to start to think about some of the first questions you're asking are, what are the records that may be available here? What are the records that may be in the public domain that I can seek through a formal request? And then are there any other types of records as you talk to sources? You know, did they document anything? Did they send emails? Did they file complaints even in a private system, but that they'd be able to share with you? So those are really important.
How do you know when you're ready to go live?
That everybody should be asking at the outset
when are you
of an investigation, because as Jodi
said,
said, once
it's a great question, because with the Weinstein investigation, I remember thinking at the time,
you know that
what are we trying to do here? You know, there was clearly so much material. Like by the time we were making some headway, there were a lot of clues that you know, what we know now is true, that the volume of complaints on this guy was bewilderingly high. And I remember thinking to myself, are we trying to publish a story about like a tenth of what Harvey Weinstein did, a fifth, half of it? Like, how important is it to capture the whole scope? And the place we eventually got to is that we really just wanted to break the story with the first story. This was like way too big to get the entire thing into a first story, but we not only needed the first story to be airtight, we needed the first story to kind of like hint at how big this was. So, for example, one of the key pieces of information that Megan was able to nail down very late in the process was that he had paid between 8 and 12 settlements, we think, to women over time. We knew what I think more than half of those were. We still don't know what all of them were, but it was like a sense of the scope, right? It was like a new settlement every, you know, couple of years in his career. And then also in terms of being ready to go, we needed, especially because he was such a powerful figure, it wasn't enough to put, you know, one piece of evidence in the paper. That first Weinstein story, which is only like 3,200 words long or something, it's got 25 years worth of allegations. It's got, you know, it's got those written memos. It has the settlement trail, the legal and financial trail. It has Ashley Judd on the record. You can read in the book, you know, about the process of trying to get Ashley Judd on the record and why it felt like such an enormous victory when we finally did, because we knew what had happened with the top actresses at that point, and we felt that we were so eager to have just one of them speak up to give, you know, the reader a taste of what he had really done.
I mean, we should also acknowledge that in our case, we also had a factor of competition. You know, you guys, everybody I'm sure is aware that Ronan Farrow was also hot on this story, hot on the trail of this story. And so he had kind of gone in and out of focus for us in terms of what he was doing. And we were aware that he had stopped, that he was no longer reporting for NBC. And we thought that was the end of, you know, his efforts in this investigative realm. And then, you know, with like in late September, we heard from sources that he was actually now at the New Yorker, and that he was, you know, it sounded like he was getting close to publishing. So especially when there are the decisions you make when you've got a story all to yourself, right? When you've got an investigation and it's yours and yours alone. And, you know, then you can say, okay, we've got this much, but we want to wait until we get this much. And then maybe we'll wait until we get this much. But if you've got competition, you know, that's also a factor that you need to acknowledge. And so there's a question of, okay, we want to, you know, we may want to wait till we get this much, but we're going to have to go with this much because, you know, we've invested a lot and we feel really strongly and we want we want to be first. I mean, it's just, we don't get into this business because we want to get scooped, right? You want to be first. So and with this idea that also once you get that first story out, so many other things are going to start to tumble out, as one of our editors, Matt Purdy, always said, once you publish, so many things start spilling out. And you see this time and again, and we see this in your guys' investigation, right? Like that there's so many pieces. You guys are just like relentless on this story. How did this teacher who was ousted for sexual misconduct, how is he back in school, and how is the school responding? And there's this, there's these protests. And so you can see how these stories continue to feed on themselves. And if you can have the front seat to that, and if you can get there first to those elements, it really, it gives the investigation that much more life.
Making sure things are tight and conveying. So that was really useful for us as well.
Yeah, and you actually, you touched upon a little bit about like your personal thoughts that you were going through and your emotions, especially with the big moment where Ashley Judd agreed to go on record. So I know, speaking personally, when we felt that all of our stories were sort of coming together and we were going through each article being published, we were dealing a lot with a mixture of adrenaline, but also anxiety. Speaking personally, I know my Twitter's coach, and she can probably agree, that combined with being a high school senior was a lot. So we just wanted to know, how do you handle such emotions at really high peak moments like this in the publishing process?
I think in some ways it's easier for us than for you, because for us it's a job. And you can channel it through your sort of professional identity, and you've got the infrastructure and support of the New York Times behind you. You have your bosses, you have your colleagues. Megan and I had each other, and I this is why we get up every day, right? I mean, we often say that like the day we get to confront a Harvey Weinstein, or the other day, we were able to put a powerful report about CNN in the paper, including some allegations of sexual assault by Chris Cuomo, the anchor and the former governor's brother. Like, those are days we look forward to. Those feel like they're not done vindictively; they're done professionally. But those are part of the reason we became journalists. Whereas I think when you're a student journalist, it's harder because you're in kind of a volunteer position and it's your choice. And you have to be so aggressive about asking questions, which is, by the way, one of the hardest things to do as a young journalist. I remember when I started in journalism, it was just like so fundamentally awkward and uncomfortable to be questioning people. You'd be like, we had old-fashioned phones back then, not cell phones, and you would be staring at the phone, feeling a little intimidated to pick it up. And so I really applaud, the way you guys have taken on this role and kind of like given the most beautiful thing about being a journalist, and one of the reasons to go into the profession, is that it's a permanent license to ask any questions you want, and that's a great thing.
I think that's a great.
But I would just like to add there, though, I'm so glad that you just acknowledged that you did have anxiety while you were working on these stories, because the last big investigation that I did was really dark, probably the darkest investigation I've done, of like a suicide website that was linked to a long trail of deaths of young people. And so first of all, it was a window into a lot of the sort of mental health challenges that so many people have. And it was also it was also very emotionally taxing for us as reporters to report into that and to really immerse ourselves in such a river of pain and suffering. And so to me, it was just a reminder, doing reporting on youth mental health and just mental health in general, is like, I actually feel like reporters need to do a better job of investigative reporters were supposed to be so tough and we're supposed to be made of steel. And sometimes getting emotional even if it's just behind the scenes, like with your editor or with your partner, can feel like a sign of weakness. And so on that project in particular, like my reporting partner and I would periodically check in with each other and say, like, I'm feeling really upset. I'm feeling really down. Like, I think I need to take a walk today. I think I need to go out and get some fresh air and get some natural light. And telling if some of these investigations are top secret and you can't really talk about it with friends or even with your family. But I think when it's not necessarily super secretive, to make sure that you are talking to your friends and your family, not just your editors about, and your colleagues about the emotional struggles, because, we need to be able to support each other and you need to be able to take care of yourself. Like, you're not going to do, when you feel that anxiety, you don't want to, we do our best work when we're feeling stable, right? And so it's really important, I think, to just be open about some of the inevitable, whether it's anxiety or feeling depressed. Investigative reporting, we're not diving into the happy subjects here. By definition, we're taking on injustice, we're taking on pain, and I think that I think the more that we can just be really upfront about that and make sure that we help take care of each other, the better.
We were there documenting it, taking pictures and live streaming, and people were going up to an open mic, and you could see the raw emotion as they were speaking. And so you can see that emotions run high in these stories. And as journalists, as not just as journalists, but as humans, we want to be empathetic, but at the same time remain our distance from that, as to maintain that journalistic process. So in our community, there has been a lot of follow-up to our reporting from students who want to see changes in how misconduct itself by teachers is handled. So we try to maintain that independence. So we don't want to be student activists, but at the same time, we want to make sure that our journalism can effectuate change. However, we sometimes get kind of lumped into the same categories as student activists. It's sometimes conflated. And so how do you maintain independence, even though it's clear that you have so much passion over the subject and you want to make sure that you're clear with your motivations?
I want to know one moment here just to say we're at time, and I want you that this is a great question, so I want if you want to answer it quickly. But I know people have to get home, go to bed, do all that good stuff. So, but I do want to hear this. I think this is a big issue. I think with a lot of student journalists that they're activists, especially, and the work you're doing too, right? That you're reporting, like you want to get the little guys' voices out there. You want to make sure justice is done, but in some ways, you're also advocating for justice.
Oh, it's much harder for you guys than it is for us. I think for us, again, because we're in that professional role, we can just state really clearly, we're not your friends, we're not your therapists, we're not members, we're not part of the situation, we're not members of the community, we're outside observers, and we want to be compassionate and we want to be fair, but there's some professional distance between us and this interaction. With you guys, it's so much harder. You're members of the community. You might be standing up to a principal who has authority over you. You might be standing up to a teacher who's giving you a grade. And of course you have opinions about what's going on in your own community. It's an interesting concept whether you can even ask a student journalist to act professional. Is that even the right word? But I think the word I would use instead for you, and my own daughter is a 16-year-old student journalist, the word I just use is fair. The word I just used with her is fair. I just said to her, what will enable people to trust you as a student journalist is if they feel you're being judicious, tough when necessary, but not overly aggressive about every single thing. You're able to see multiple sides of an issue. You're able maybe even to sympathize with somebody who's made a mistake and done something wrong, even if you're, chronicling that mistake in a way that may be painful for them. And so the quality, but I do think it's true that there are certain lines you can't cross. I mean, it seems to me that you can't go to that sit-in if you're covering it, but your best friend might be going, which, which is interesting, and makes these, it makes these, in a way, puts like more pressure on you to define yourself in that situation.
Yeah, there's actually a bit of an equivalent there too, in terms of like, in the same way that you guys can't go to a sit-in, when Jodi and I watched, when we watched the Me Too movement really take off, and we saw, protests and people taking to social media and sharing their opinions and their personal experiences, it was so inspiring to watch that. But we also knew that we couldn't participate in any way, even after, and I had done some of the reporting on allegations, sexual misconduct allegations made against Donald Trump, then candidate Donald Trump in 2016, and then helped, cover his election to the White House. And I had friends who went to the Women's March. And that's just something that Jodi and I would never do. And I know the pull towards activism, especially as a young person. I mean, when I was in high school, I was part of a walkout to protest racism by a teacher. When I was in college, I helped organize a Take Back the Night rally. And there's no question that activism can play a really important role in helping to spur social change. But another reason that Jodi and I really wanted to write this book is that we have seen in our own lives and in our own work, and in observing and appreciating so many other investigative projects, what a huge difference they can make, and what a huge difference you can make in the world if you follow these journalistic guidelines and principles and adhere to those values. I talked about how I think it's really important for journalists to share with each other some of the emotionally taxing aspects of this work, and to be honest when they're having anxiety and when they're feeling overwhelmed by emotion. I want to be clear that what I'm talking about there is what I think we should be doing behind the scenes. Jodi and I would also never, we just don't go on social media, and in interviews, we don't talk about our personal experiences, and we don't talk about, we really try to stay within, constantly adhere to the guidelines and the principles of journalism, which are that you're separate from the story, and you're separate. I mean, you can have tremendous empathy, and you wouldn't be covering these stories if you didn't care about the issues, if you didn't care about sexual misconduct. But it's, when you sign up for this, you're signing up.
Thank you so much, everyone, for being here today.
I'm so excited we talked a little bit about our book is really, our hope is that can help clarify some of those principles and guidelines for all the young journalists out there.
Jodi, Megan, thank you for being here today. Thank you for this amazing guide. And as someone who's worked with young journalists for her whole career, when I read this, it was a page turner that I was so excited about, but also such a resource for teachers, for students, the classic editors. You all are amazing. You're doing great work. Shout out to your teacher, Mr. Sweeney. I'm really excited, and we need you. So thank you for the work that you're doing. Thank you for covering your school like no other local news organization. It really matters. And for everyone who joined the live chat today, thank you for being here and for listening. This was a really great conversation. And don't forget to pick up your copy of Chasing the Truth. It's available in bookstores all over, online, in person, all of the good stuff. If you're not quite ready for investigative journalists, but you want to get into journalism a little, there's my book, A Newshound's Guide to Student Journalism, that uses a graphic novel to get you a little bit into what journalism is and what it means. And really want to thank the Student Press Law Center for bringing us all together today so we can have this conversation, for the work they do, not only on Student Press Freedom Day, but 365 days a year. Remember, they have their hotline, so they are really 24/7. So thank you to the Student Press Law Center for supporting the rights of young journalists everywhere. And for everyone, you can join us next Thursday, which is Student Press Freedom Day. SPLC is having a letter writing party. You can connect directly with SPLC staff and fellow student journalists. You're going to contact your legislators, other decision makers, and you're going to tell them about the press freedom that you want in your state. And this is for whether you're an experienced advocate or just brand new to the whole idea of student press freedom. We really want to see you there. You can follow us here on Instagram, and we'll give you more updates on how you can be involved. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us. And don't forget, for Student Press Freedom Day, to unmute yourself. Thank you. Have a great night, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Take care. Thank you, Katina.
For recognizing student journalists.
Night.
Lovely speaking with you all.